Hi, this is Unsuitable with Mary B. Safrit, the podcast where I interview single Christians about their lives and faith. Welcome to episode 6, the first episode of our Unsuitable in Relationship and Community series. I want to specify right off the bat that when I say relationships, I'm speaking very broadly. So it includes dating relationships, but also friendships, family relationships, church, community, etc. So for this series, I'm going to kick things off with Liz Smith. Liz just finished her master's in library science at Rutgers, and she's currently job hunting. She has worked in public relations and editorial positions for nonprofit organizations, including the New York Public Library and American Bible Society. She was also a member of the Blue Hill Troupe, a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta group, before becoming a Christ follower and churchgoer. Liz blogs as Missouri St. Clair at wordpress.missouristclair.com. And she also created a website dedicated to memoirs called memoirsatatglance.com. Both those links are in the episode description. Liz is going to share some serious wisdom about some of her past dating relationships, mental and emotional health in relationship, forgiveness, and healing. Liz led a recovery group for women coming out of codependent relationships, so she has a lot of great things to say about that as well. Before we get started, though, Liz and I throw around some terms that you might not be familiar with. So I'm going to define a couple of them for you, just in case you're new to some of this language. So a codependent relationship involves one or more people with an excessive emotional or psychological reliance on a partner, typically one who requires support on account of an illness or addiction. And that definition is straight from the Googs. Enmeshment is a common symptom in these relationships. Enmeshment is when the boundary between two individuals gets blurred so that it's difficult to tell where one person ends and the other begins. Boundaries are emotional and physical limitations that we place on ourselves and relationships in order to maintain the health of both parties and the relationship. If this is new territory for you, stick around to the end of the episode because we list some helpful resources. So with that, let's get started. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Mary B.
Welcome to the studio / my office.
Thank you. I love it.
Great. Love having you here. So you and I met in the context of a writers group, and I think I overheard you maybe talking to someone about this blog that you had where you had written about all of these relationships you've been in, and I just knew I had to have you on the podcast. So could you talk a little bit about your blog? Like, why did you start it? What is it all about?
Yeah. In my last major job, which was now a couple years back because I've been to graduate school since then, I found myself a little bored, and I decided that I would start a blog on WordPress, and I had tons of material given past relationships, and I thought that I would do it with a pseudonym so that I could be as personal as I wanted to and as honest as I wanted to. And as a Christian, I didn't want to feel self-conscious about mentioning things that might not sound very Christian.
Right.
So I found an alter ego. And so I started writing about former relationships with her name. And she's actually a distant relative.
Yeah.
A real person who did live.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. You posted a blog very recently, like yesterday, and it was written in the third person. And the name that you used was
Blair.
Blair, that's right.
Yeah.
Blair, which is different from the pseudonym.
Exactly. The
Right.
pseudonym is Missouri St. Clair. And I chose Blair because it's kind of a variation on Elizabeth. And I used pseudonyms for every other character in the story. And this is a story that has gone on over more than 30 years. It's concerning a relationship that broke up when I was in my 20s. And I wanted to be able to capture the ongoing drama in my own mind about that relationship. And I think that I've been able to make this story come alive, and it ends on kind of a questioning note, which I think is very real, because I don't feel resolved about this. It was a pre-Christian relationship.
Okay.
And there were a lot of dramatic things that happened.
Yeah.
But I feel good about the way that I ended it, because it ends on a question, and that's really what's going on still in my mind about it. But I ended up writing about 19 pages, and
Wow.
yeah, I think I captured quite a few episodes in the relationship that are still feeling fresh to me.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that I can recall so many details from 30 years ago.
Yeah. That is interesting, because I've, in therapy have brought up previous relationships. Well, the one that I have. I've brought it up, a couple times, and there's a lot of it that still feels, details that I'm able to recall, and this is stuff that's just still very fresh. And I think I feel like it's interesting the way that you're capturing all of this, because I feel like we do carry those experiences with us. We carry those memories with us, and that you're able to find a way to write about that so honestly, but still be able to distance yourself enough by using this pseudonym, so that you could honor the stories. You could be as just vulnerable and raw as you needed to be. I think that's really interesting.
Well, I have learned over the 30 years since I became a Christian, that I can peg a year and what happened in a year according to a breakup, because there will be a lot of hyper emotion around a certain year, and I know why. It's because my emotions were so fully engaged in that time that I can remember vividly. And something about a very heavy-duty emotional experience programs your brain to never forget it. So I think that's why I have a lot of recall, is that I have invested a lot of emotional energy in these relationships.
Yeah.
And as a person who has never married, at the age of 60, I have had quite a few relationships, as well as a lot of decades to process the meaning in those relationships, both pre-Christian and post-Christian.
Right.
It's been really cool that God has given me this time to look back and reflect and try to make sense of why things happened the way they did.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's really interesting. A lot of what you've said is very, very interesting. Just in terms of being able to take a step back and look back and reflect on all of this, and to see God at work in all of it. And also to, like you were talking about, those hyper emotional experiences really searing things into your brain and probably into your heart and your spirit as well. But now, being a Christian and having that Christian experience for the past 30 years, it gives you a different hope, I would think.
Absolutely. When I look at my life right now from a worldly perspective, and if I were to have a conversation with someone my age who has had a marriage and children and a house and all of those normal hallmarks of adulthood, I would think they might actually feel sorry for me that I haven't done all those things.
Right.
But I don't feel sorry for me, because God has given me a hope. I am not bitter. I still feel that there's hope. I mean, I could still get married. I could still have
Anne Lamott just got married.
I know. She's
Yeah.
like 64
She's
or something.
like that, yeah.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. I follow her on Instagram.
She's amazing.
Yeah, and I love her books.
Her.
Me too. Yeah. She's so cool. And her husband is tall and handsome.
He is, yeah.
And you and I both need a tall and handsome husband.
Oh
yeah.
my gosh, because we are both tall.
We are both tall. Absolutely. So, yeah, but there is grace in God giving me all this time now to look back on the relationships that I have had and to have a sense of humor about it and to realize that I have been given the gift of being able to love and to love intensely, whether or not it was returned.
Right.
I still feel like I have treasures in my experience.
So you've never been married, but you did have a close call at one point, if you want to phrase it like that. I don't know if you want to phrase it like that.
It certainly was a close call.
A close call. Will you tell me about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, when I was in my early 30s, I did feel the natural biological clock ticking, and I did want to get married, and I still do. But at the time, I was a pretty new Christian, and I had had a relationship that was very, very intense, and I was crazy about this person, and that relationship ended. And then a couple years later, I thought, well, I need to find another person. And there was a wonderful guy at church, and I set my eyes on him, and we started dating. And then 7 months later, we were engaged.
Wow.
And I had set the date to get married in May. And along the months leading up to the marriage date, the wedding date, I got cold feet. And unfortunately, I really started to freak out in my mind. I thought, I think this is not the right marriage for me or for him. And it turned out to be true. I unfortunately, I waited until 12 days before the wedding date, and then I called it off. The second I called it off, I had peace, a peace that flooded me and has never left.
Wow.
So I know I did the right thing. Unfortunately, I have, for a long time, I felt very sad and very guilty about hurting this person.
Yeah.
But he forgave me. He taught me a really important lesson. He showed me how to forgive. It was amazing. He was older in the Lord than I was.
Yeah.
And he said, first, I'm going to tell you now, I will forgive you, but there's going to be a period of time before I can emotionally forgive you. So my first forgiveness will be legal. My second forgiveness will be emotional.
Wow.
So I said, well, please feel free to call me and scream at me on the phone if you need to, because I deserve it.
Yeah.
But it was such a model of forgiveness that I have never forgotten, and I've used through the years in being able to forgive other people.
Wow.
So it was, I don't know if that's what God wanted me to know or learn from this, but fortunately he moved on, got married, and had kids. So that was the best possible outcome.
Yeah. You talk on your blog about celibacy and about that decision, and wrestling through some of the implications of that. But I think like you were saying, with people who do make that decision, who do practice celibacy, there is this sort of, at a certain time in your life, a very real drive and need to, the biological clock is ticking, and you're like, I need someone to like do this with, I need to get this out of me and experience this. And the fact that you were able to say, okay, you know what, actually, maybe this is not the right guy, not the right timing for me. When all of that was going on, when you felt that biological clock ticking, I think is a huge grace, right? It was all probably grace for you.
It was, and I think that his forgiveness, too, was grace. But that intensity of the drive that I had to try to find someone only let up in my mid-50s when I started to go through menopause. And now that I'm post-menopausal, there's a new freedom that comes when your hormones are no longer raging.
Right.
And I am starting to return to, I think, my original true self, pre-puberty,
Right.
where I was able to access more joy and an experience of life without the confusion that hormones give you. And
yeah.
I just wish that I could have maintained that sense of myself through my 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. But it's coming back. So there is good news. There's a lot of growth that can happen in your 60s. And I'm excited about it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I have a renewed sense of hope about life, and it is wonderful. You can even feel your body changing in good ways. Like right now, I'm taking yoga. I've been in a yoga class for a few months, and I am being able to do poses using my arms and doing stretches and doing headstands that I didn't think I'd be able to do at this age. So I'm really excited to see that in myself.
That's awesome. You spoke about in this relationship, you broke up and then he married the next woman. And from, conversations we've had, that's been a bit of a theme for you that has led to some of these like unsuitable kinds of feelings. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It is a strange pattern in my life that every single man I've had a serious romantic relationship with, we've broken up and they've married the next person. So I call myself the penultimate girlfriend because, I have been in service to the person who becomes the wife. They get to practice and it ends. And that sounds really pathetic, but for some reason, God has allowed that. And I have wondered and pondered, was I unsuitable, for each and every person? And in hindsight, I realized, oh my gosh, the person that guy married is really the right person for him. And I turned out not to be the right person for him. So by God's blessing, I have been able to accept my unsuitability for those past relationships and to grow and to try not to try so hard next time. Not to fit a square peg in a round hole or, manipulate somebody emotionally so that they like me. I'm just, my goal is to just be myself from here on out.
Yeah. And it's cool that, you're in a place where you have a perspective of, okay, maybe I was unsuited for those relationships specifically, but I am not unsuitable for relationships in general.
That's right. I am in a place of major healing, in fact, from a lot of family relationships.
Yeah.
I'm in therapy and making a lot of progress in understanding my responsibility in some of the things that happened to me, and also the other person's responsibility in what happened to me. But I am loving my relationships with my two younger sisters and my nieces, and seeing a new kind of relationship with my mother. And, I have fantastic female friendships. Redeemer Presbyterian Church has been a fount of wonderful friends for me through the years. And I'm in touch with those people on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
And they minister to me, I minister to them, and we are all just continuing to grow and evolve. And it is exciting.
Yeah, I think it's, you seem to, I don't know, is this like your peace about this? You seem to be in a place of peace about this. Is that kind of a day-by-day situation? Or would you feel like it's something that you have found you're starting to find?
I would say, I've been at peace for a long time about the way my relationships have turned out in terms of men. I understand, that things are the way they are through God's grace. But other relationships that may have been the foundational setting for maybe my misperceptions about myself, I am still working on those.
Okay.
And finding a lot of healing in various ways, such as a 12-step program for adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families.
Yeah.
My family had a lot of dysfunction in it.
Yeah.
There was divorce, there was addiction. I didn't cause those things, but they had an effect on me.
Right.
And now I'm starting to separate out who I really am from those unhealthy patterns that I grew up seeing.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing that, wow, I was a good kid, and it wasn't fair that some of the things happened to me that did happen. But now I'm a Christian, I can forgive, and I'm just enjoying seeing all the healing and the growth and the total evolution that's coming into my life now. And it's never too late.
Yeah. And you said a really interesting thing previously about, your responsibility for things that went wrong in it was in the context of your romantic relationships, but that's a huge part of healing. And part of the 12 steps is owning what you have brought to the table that was dysfunctional in those situations, as opposed to scapegoating your entire family.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I saw, this goes back into the 1990s, I saw a pattern of codependency in myself.
Yeah.
And I spoke about it to a counselor. And he suggested that I run a group for women coming out of codependent relationships. And I said, I shouldn't run the group. I should be in the group. And he said, oh, no, you're the perfect person to run it. And he trained me in the dynamics of running a group like that. And then I said, okay. And I ran it for 2 years. And it turned out to be a fantastic growing experience for not just me, but everyone else in the group. But that takes a lot of time to come to terms with. The pattern of codependency was something I needed a lot of decades to get over that. And now I feel like I'm able to be interdependent.
Yeah. That's a huge difference. And I don't know, I have the language for this because I've been in therapy and I'm familiar with like a lot of the 12-step, a lot of the language of that kind of behavior, codependency, enabling, et cetera. But I don't know how much in the common vocabulary those things are, but they're so common. And I don't know. I watch movies or I listen to songs and I'm like, this is so codependent. Like, this is so unhealthy. Please do not base relationships based on, don't think this is a romantic thing. This is a codependent thing. This is wildly unhealthy.
Absolutely. And it was funny, I was recently taking a driving trip with my uncle, who's a lot older than I am, and he didn't know what the term codependent meant.
Right.
He said, wow, I'm going to Google that as soon as I get home. Maybe it is psycholingo, as he called it, but I think that a lot of people do get into codependency without realizing it.
Yeah.
And it can become a sick, enmeshed, very destructive thing and not good for either person.
Yeah.
And very hard to separate out the threads of where do you begin and where does the other person begin and end. And so boundaries. Yeah. Boundaries are very important to start building.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know what your role was in your family situation. The codependent people can take on like a caretaker role, or an enabling kind of role, that actually something I've had to learn is I would see it as like service or like sacrificial love or some of these words that we throw around in church. And actually, like, if I'm not doing that with a sense of separation of who I am versus who you are, then it's not actually service for that person. It's actually, putting a weight onto them of my whole self and my whole being, which is not how relationships were designed.
Yeah. Well, I learned at the foot of my father, who was an addictive cigarette smoker. He smoked 3 packs of unfiltered Pall Mall cigarettes while I was growing up a day. And I mean, everywhere we went, in the car, to a movie, in the house, he was smoking. And as young as 5 years old, I was very conscious that this was hurting him. And he called them coffin nails, which was, he thought it was funny, but I thought it was tragic.
Yeah.
And I remember him saying, Elizabeth, go get me another pack of coffin nails from the freezer. He would keep an entire carton of Pell Mills in the freezer. He thought they were fresher that way. And one time I just took the entire carton and I put it in the kitchen garbage.
Yeah.
And he was furious. But I took my sisters, who were 2 years younger, outside, and I said, okay, guys, I was 5 and they were 3. I made a little circle. It was almost like a prayer circle. We held hands and we were looking down at the ground. And I said, okay, repeat after me. I am never going to smoke cigarettes.
Wow.
And so the 3 of us have never smoked cigarettes.
Yeah.
But I needed to try to control my father. So through the years, I would always say, Daddy, stop smoking. You know, I tried to find reasons for him. And the addicted person will not listen.
No.
They have their own agenda.
Yeah.
So it was very tough. And he did die young, which still breaks my heart.
Yeah. I think just for anyone who might be listening to this who doesn't know what codependency and doesn't know some of these terms, would you, since you've run a group for people who experience this, would you be able to define codependency?
In my experience, yeah, I think that it is expecting another person to be your everything, to fill in where you might feel insecure about some part of your life, that you're looking to the other person to be your savior, to fill in those holes that maybe only God can really fill. And I mean, you know, somebody said, I forget who it was who said, you know, pain abhors a vacuum. So we will try to fill in any place in ourselves where we are in pain with something else. It could be alcohol, it could be cigarettes, it could be any kind of substance. Or it could be a relationship. And a codependent relationship often becomes so overwhelming to the person who's looking for that other person to fulfill their every single need. I was a master at this, at getting the other person to fill me with a sense of emotional well-being. And it wasn't good for that other person. And they started to feel suffocated and like they needed space. And that's when I would start to panic and start to demand more of their time, more of their resources, more phone calls, and it would push them further and further away. So I chose really cool people to do this to. I had good taste, but I ended up destroying relationships by expecting way too much from the other person. And it's just taken me years to allow God to be everything to me instead of expecting a human being who's fallible just as I am to do that for me.
Yeah, and that's something I've noticed in my previous relationship. I was also a teenager, so I didn't know anything about anything. But it was very much like that, right? It was this like all of these insecurities, and there was a lot of baggage that I was bringing to that relationship that I didn't even know about at the time because I was like 16, 17, 18. But yeah, it's exactly that sense of I am responsible for your entire well-being, and I get my well-being from your sense of well-being.
Exactly. That is a perfect way of seeing codependency. That, in fact, one of my relationships in my 20s, I was actually living with somebody, living in sin. I wasn't a Christian yet. And we were equally codependent. This was a person he was actually in medical school. He was going to be an MD, and he did do that, and he did marry the next person. But he was just as needy as I was. And in a way, we really filled each other's needs for a year or two until I realized how sick the relationship was and how I knew I didn't want to marry somebody who was just as needy as I was. I knew in my heart of hearts that I had to heal that side of me first.
Yeah.
Before I would be, and then I went on and chose better people, but then I looked to them to fill my needs. I hadn't quite healed yet, even though I was picking better people.
Right.
So, yeah, that's how it's just an all-consuming kind of thing that doesn't help either person to grow up.
Yeah. There's like, it's so, I'm in therapy as well. Like now, I mean, I have been for a little while off and on, but it's amazing to be able to have that objective perspective of someone you're telling all this stuff to, and they can pick out the patterns. They can, and they're also like totally committed to, it's their job to help you see all of this stuff. And that's their only agenda. Besides therapy, and you're in this 12-step program, what has kind of been, has your faith played a big role in your healing through all of this?
Absolutely. I remember in the early days of Redeemer, when we were first at Hunter College, where they no longer are,
Right.
there was this amazing situation where you could either sit in the orchestra downstairs or you could sit in the balcony.
Yeah.
And so after several breakups, there was this pattern. I would go sit in the balcony so I wouldn't have to see the person I used to date. And what I found was that God was faithful to me. God was able to give me the strength to keep going back to church. I thought that was the key turning point for me, being such a new Christian, was whether or not I would still go back to church after a breakup. And I never missed church. I never missed Bible study. I was growing faith. God was faithful to grow me in Him through those extremely painful times. And then I had to make new friends, because very often a set of friends would be in relation to the former relationship.
Right.
And so I made new friends. And they have turned out to be friends who are really friends with me for who I am, not friends because that person and I were a couple. So I was able to learn how to trust better and open up to those new friends. And God has grown me so much through the years. And now I'm co-leading a Bible study in New Jersey, where I now live. I think about God every single day. You know, I can't live without the nurturing and the peace and the wisdom that I get from the Bible and from the daily meditations that I read and the praying with friends over the phone. God is the most important relationship in my life. And I have to defend God all the time to my family, because my father was an atheist and my siblings are atheist, and my mother is a churchgoer, but I wouldn't say she's a full-blown believer. So I am oftentimes the only one in a family setting, whether it's Easter or Christmas or just, a Memorial Day weekend,
right,
where I am the one who is holding to my very core about who God is, who Jesus Christ is, how the Holy Spirit is working my life. And sometimes I am really experiencing persecution. I love my sisters and my mother and my nieces and my brother-in-law, but I am able, because of my Christianity, to not hold them in such an intense bond emotionally anymore. I mean, I'm able to have more boundaries than I used to, and realize that what I need is emotionally, I'm going to get it from the Lord, from my Christian girlfriends, and I am not going into a family situation expecting the same things I used to. So it's much, much healthier. And I do sometimes put boundaries in how long I will spend with family, because I've learned that less is more.
Yeah.
Before we start to get into old issues and dredge up something that's unresolved, it's better to just move on, go home, take care of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And, they can just be people, right? They're not this ultimate thing anymore, which I think is a part of the issue that maybe we see in the church with how much pressure there's put on marriage and family. And, for people who don't fall into that narrative, that it can be very hard and very heartbreaking because we're making this ultimate thing out of getting married, out of having kids, out of having a family. But to be able to put those things into perspective, to put them into the place that they were designed to be, which is underneath our relationship with God, right? Then people can just be people. There isn't that same expectation and pressure for, and the same anger and grief over what you maybe think things should have been like, or how you think your life should have been.
Exactly. And it's funny because now as of this year, which is 2019, I am 30 years in the Lord. So in a way, I see myself as back to being in my early 30s. So, this time I'm going to be in my early 30s as a healthy person, as a healed person.
Yeah.
And with God completely supporting me every single day, every single hour, I look forward to the adventure that He still has for me. And this time I'm not going to strangle, different kinds of relationships that I might have, because they're not as all, they're not going to be my all in all and give me every possible nuance of meaning in my life, because I'm giving myself meaning in life with God's help.
Yeah, a way that I've liked to think about it, even with like friendships, is to, I think of this tendency, this like codependency tendency, that rhymed, as like holding people with the clenched fists.
Absolutely.
But what would it look like to just kind of hold them in an open hand?
Yes.
For them to come and go, for the Lord to bring them into your life and to take them away, depending on where they are in their journey. And so you can let them be on their own path, following the Lord, or, not, depending. But, for Christian relationships, giving them the permission and the freedom and the encouragement to follow the Lord wherever He may take them, even if that is out of your life.
Absolutely. I love that image. I remember a friend of mine said, Liz, if you're going to grab a handful of sand and clench it, the sand's all going to fall out because you haven't left any room. But if you hold your hand open, you're still going to be able to hold some sand in your hand, and yet let some of it fall through your fingers, because if you clench something, it will die.
Yeah.
And if you hold on loosely, it will live. And I know that's it sounds a little cliched, but there's a lot of truth to that. And I totally believe that now. I totally understand it. I love that old line from a Sting song, The Police. I think it was in the late 80s, maybe. We said, if you love someone, let them go. Or let them be free. I forget the exact line from that song. And I used to ponder that and think, that sounds so tragic, because I didn't understand it. And now I understand. If you let the person be who they're supposed to be, they can then come back to you when they feel like it.
Right.
Or come back to relating to you when the time is right. So that's a very important lesson in life.
Yeah. And it's a different kind of trust, I think. It is trust. It's not a different kind of trust. It is trust, as opposed to something that's like a lot more controlling, and needy and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So this is a little off the cuff. Are there any like books or resources that have been really helpful for you in this process? Just for anyone who's listening, who's maybe thinking, oh, that kind of sounds like something I've experienced.
Well, I remember reading the book Codependent No More by Melody Beattie, I think her name is. And
Is
then
that the one with the like dandelion on the front?
I can't remember.
I feel like
It's probably been
I haven't
reissued.
read it, but I feel like I've seen it around.
It's a good one. And then anything written by Henry Cloud and John Townsend.
Oh yeah, the Boundaries books.
Yeah, the Boundaries books. One of the books that the group I ran for a couple of years, we started out was with a book called Changes That Heal, which was awesome. But yeah, anything by those guys. And yeah, there are lots and lots of resources for this kind of thing. For one thing, the 12-step group, which is called, you can go to adultchildren.org, and there's this...
Or Al-Anon.
Or Al-Anon,
yeah. That's a good one, too.
Yeah, they have this book called The Big Red Book, and they list the 14 traits of an adult child. It's called the laundry list. And if you feel that you have maybe at least three of those traits, then you qualify. And so the book then deals with each of the steps of starting to come out of denial and look at yourself more honestly and take a moral inventory of yourself. I love that. I think it's step 4. Make
it is.
a searching.
There, I have the 12 steps.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
posted right in my office because I'm doing a blog series on them right now.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, the wonderful thing about the 12 steps, it's really, I think, inspired by, they say your higher power. I would say Jesus Christ, but at the 12th step is all about bringing the wisdom and the strength and the growth that you've been able to get to other people.
Yeah.
And I think that there are way more people out there than they would like to admit who could use a program like this.
I think that everyone should go through it, to be honest.
And if you haven't ever
so
looked
good.
at that, then you probably are in some form of denial. And denial is not an evil thing. Sometimes it's just a tool that you use that's necessary to get through something that's painful.
It's a survival
instinct.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then it wears out its welcome, and it then can stymie your growth if you hold on to it for too long. So yeah, I think anybody can get something out of going through a 12-step program.
Yeah, and they're not just for people who experience addiction or know someone who experiences addiction. It's for like anyone.
Yeah, any kind of, if you had, like my parents were divorced, and that was definitely a dysfunction.
Right.
So, or any kind of even subtle emotional abuse can, for a sensitive child, that can become really put your little boat going in the wrong direction in the stream of life, because you may have misinterpreted what the input that you got.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's all very great, very helpful. Thank you for that. Before we close out, will you tell me one thing that's hard right now and one thing that's great?
Well, I just finished a master's degree, and so...
Congratulations.
Thank you, Mary B. I'm looking for a job, and that's hard. I would rather be at work and working now, but I know it takes time. It takes time to find the right job and the interview process and so forth. But so it's frustrating because we're in this whole new world where everything is done online. So to try to communicate my personality to a potential recruiter is
so hard.
It's very hard. But anyway, that's hard. But one thing that's great, I do have wonderful nieces. One is 20 and the other is 18, and it's really
That's
exciting.
how old my nephews are.
Oh,
well,
really?
21 and 18. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. And they're super tall.
Oh my gosh.
And gorgeous. And it's just so fun to watch them grow up.
Yeah.
And they're so confident and capable. And for me to see that, my sister did a brilliant job with them.
Yeah.
So it's really exciting and encouraging to see young people who are stepping into their own so much earlier in their lives than I did. So it's fun.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all of the stories and the wisdom you shared.
Thank you, Mary B., for doing this. You are doing an incredible service to the world.
Thank you for saying that.
You're welcome.
If you want a written list of those resources Liz and I talked about and links with other helpful articles and resources and stuff, head over to the episode page on my website, marybsafrit.com. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Liz for her openness and wisdom. Theme music is by Chad Rollinson, and sound editing is by Andrew Kim. Next week, you're going to hear from my friend Rob about what happens when relationships and community in a church setting go wrong. If you have any thoughts or want to engage on this topic further, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Or you can go to my website, marybsafrit.com. While you're there, feel free to subscribe to my newsletter. You'll get an email from me every other Wednesday with an exclusive message and direct access to content and resources I think you'll love. You can also shoot me a message by clicking on Contact Me. And you can always head over to Instagram and follow me at maryb.safrit. That's all for now. Check back next week for a brand new episode.